Be grateful. You're used to Coach, Becky said, sliding my ticket across the counter like it was a dirty napkin. My throat tightened so fast I almost choked on air. One sentence. That was all it took to make the airport feel smaller than a closet. The check-in area was bright in the worst way. Harsh overhead lights that left nowhere to hide, bouncing off the polished floor and the metal stanchions, making every face look sharp-edged and awake. The smell of coffee and disinfectant mingled with jet fuel seeping in from somewhere unseen. I stood there with my purse strap cutting into my shoulder, my carry-on handle sweating under my palm, and my boyfriend, Evan, was beside me like a piece of furniture. Present. Useless. Becky and her husband had arrived with his siblings like a parade. Loud rolling suitcases, laughing about Cabo, spring break, the ocean. 7 first-class boarding passes fanned out in Becky's hand like she was dealing cards at a game she already owned. Then she turned and handed me mine. Coach. Not even a pause. Not even a glance that said, oops. Just that smug little smile at the corners of her mouth, like she'd been waiting to see how I'd take it. I looked at Evan, expecting him to blink, to ask, to say, Mom, what is this? Anything. But he only shifted his weight, eyes flicking away like the floor had suddenly become fascinating. Becky tilted her head and let her voice carry, not shouting. She didn't need to. It's fine, she said, sweet as spoiled fruit. You're used to it. I had a free coach ticket, so you should be grateful you're going at all. Used to it. As if my life was a place people sent me when they didn't want me seen. As if my parents' calloused hands and modest home had branded me with a permanent seat assignment. I've worked as a nurse for over 20 years. I've held strangers' hands while they died. I've cleaned blood off tiles at 3 in the morning and still shown up the next day with my hair pulled back and my heart steady. But right then, standing under that light, I felt 14 again, standing outside a room I wasn't invited into, pretending I didn't care. They breezed to the express line. First class meant priority check-in, quick tags, private smiles from staff. Becky's daughters laughed, already taking pictures. The men were talking about tequila and deep-sea fishing, and I was left in the long coach line with families and backpacks and crying toddlers, pressed shoulder to shoulder with people who didn't know me and didn't have to. Evan mumbled something about meeting me at the gate. He didn't say it like a promise. He said it like a plan that required no effort. I stood there while the line crawled. My luggage sat at my feet like a loyal dog. Every few seconds I could see Becky over the ropes, her head turned just enough to check if I was still where she put me. Each time her eyes landed on mine, she looked away like she'd just confirmed something she'd always believed. I kept swallowing tears until my throat felt raw. By the time I reached the counter, my hands were trembling. The agent was a young woman with kind eyes and neat braids tucked behind her ears. She smiled the way people do when they're trained to be calm, no matter what mess walks up to them. "Hi there," she said. "Can I see your ID and your boarding pass?" I handed them over with fingers that didn't want to cooperate. She typed, clicked again. The printer whirred softly. Then she looked up, gentle but businesslike. "There's a checked baggage fee for this ticket." I stared at her. "A fee?" "Yes, ma'am." Her voice stayed even. Coach fares sometimes don't include a checked bag. Behind me, the line shuffled forward, impatient shoes scuffing. In front of me, the counter gleamed under light so cold it felt like judgment. And to my right, just past the ropes, I saw Becky's face, smug, waiting. The corners of her mouth lifting like she couldn't help it. I looked around for Evan. He was near the first-class group, half turned toward them, phone in hand, acting like the scene at my counter wasn't his business. He didn't move. He didn't even make eye contact. His silence felt worse than Becky's words. Silence had weight when someone you love chooses it. I reached for my card, and something in me, something tight and tired and humiliated, snapped. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't dramatic. It was just my breath hitching and refusing to smooth itself out. The tears came hot and sudden, and the sound that escaped me was ugly. Half sob, half gasp, like I'd been holding my dignity together with thread, and it finally tore. "I'm sorry," I blurted to the agent, my voice cracking. I just... The agent's eyes softened. She leaned in a fraction, lowering her voice so the people behind me wouldn't feast on it. "Sweetheart," she said quietly, "you don't have to go with people who treat you like this." That did it. That simple kindness, that one sentence from a stranger was the first time anyone had defended me out loud. I pressed my palm to my face, trying to stop the tears. Failing. My shoulders shook. The agent slid the boarding pass back toward me slowly, like she was giving me permission to choose myself. I looked again at Becky. She was watching me the way you watch a show you paid to see, and I realized, standing there under those lights, that the trip wasn't the point. The seat wasn't the point. This was Becky marking territory. This was her reminding me in public exactly where she believed I belonged. I picked up my carry-on. The handle rattled. My checked bag tag hadn't even been printed yet. "I'm not doing this," I said. Not to the agent. She didn't need convincing. But to myself. My voice was small, but it was real. The agent nodded once, like she understood more than I'd said. "Do you need help stepping out of line?" I shook my head and grabbed my suitcase, dragging it backward, the wheels catching on the floor grooves. People in line leaned away. Some pretended not to see. One woman gave me a look that wasn't pity exactly, more like recognition. I stepped out, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the airport noise. Evan finally noticed. He hurried over, eyes wide, mouth opening like he was about to say something useful for the first time that morning. "What are you doing?" he asked, like I was the one causing a scene. I stared at him. His face was familiar, handsome even. But in that moment, it looked like a mask. Someone wearing my boyfriend's features while letting his mother cut me down. "I'm leaving," I said. He blinked. "Babe, come on, it's just a seat. Don't be dramatic." Just a seat. Just a word. Just a mother who got to decide my worth while he stood there and let her. I could feel Becky behind him, closing in like she wanted to witness the final blow. I didn't even turn fully to her. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of my full attention. "This isn't about a seat," I said, my voice shaking but steadier than my hands. "This is about you watching your mother humiliate me and doing nothing." Evan scoffed like I was embarrassing him. "She paid for the trip. You should be thankful." Thankful. The same word Becky had used, like it was a family motto. Becky's heels clicked, closer. I felt her presence before I heard her, a shadow sliding into the edge of my vision. When I finally turned, her expression wasn't anger. It was controlled pleasure, the kind that comes from getting exactly what you wanted without having to raise your voice. And then she opened her mouth again, right there in the middle of the terminal, like she had one more sentence prepared to finish me off. Becky didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She stepped closer until the smell of her perfume, powdery and expensive like department store counters, pushed into my space, and she smiled as if we were sharing a joke. "Well," she said, eyes flicking to Evan first, then back to me. "If you're going to cry over a baggage fee, Cabo might be a little much for you." I felt my cheeks burn. The terminal noise kept moving around us, rolling suitcases, overhead announcements, a child whining. But inside my body, everything slowed down, like I'd been dropped into cold water. My fingers tightened on my suitcase handle until my knuckles blanched. Evan gave a short laugh. Not a full laugh. Just a little puff of air that told me exactly where he was standing, even while he stood beside me. That was the moment I realized I wasn't being misunderstood. I was being measured, tested, and they were enjoying the results. I opened my mouth to answer, but my voice wouldn't come right away. My throat did that tight thing it does when you're trying not to give someone your tears. I swallowed hard, tasted something metallic, and forced myself to breathe through my nose. The agent at the counter called, "Ma'am," softly, like she was checking if I was okay. I didn't turn back. If I looked at her kindness again, I'd fall apart. Becky shifted her weight, one perfectly manicured hand resting on the strap of her designer tote. Her eyes moved over me, my sensible shoes, my plain cardigan, the cheap carry-on I'd bought on sale, like she was inventorying the reasons I didn't belong. "I don't do drama," she added, voice smooth. "Not on vacation. We're supposed to have fun." Drama. That word landed like a slap, like my humiliation was something I'd created, not something she'd arranged. I tried to steady myself with action. I tugged my suitcase back another inch, making space, making a decision with my body before my heart could second-guess it. Evan lowered his voice, leaning toward me as if this was private. "Please," he said. But it didn't sound like concern. It sounded like fear. Fear of his mother being mad, fear of his family staring, fear of losing the image of everything being fine. "Just come. We'll figure it out once we're there." Figure it out. Like my dignity was a logistical problem. I looked at him, really looked, and I saw the pattern that had been there all along. He wanted me to absorb discomfort quietly so his life stayed easy. My chest tightened. I felt watched. I could feel the attention of strangers like heat on my skin. A couple standing near the coffee kiosk slowed, pretending to scroll their phones while listening. A man in a business suit glanced over and then looked away fast, like he'd been caught. Becky noticed that too. Her mouth curled. She liked having an audience. "I'm not asking you to do anything unreasonable," she said, louder now. Not loud, just loud enough. "We included you. We paid. Some people would appreciate that." Included. Like a charity case. I could hear my own pulse. I could feel the thin line between keeping my composure and shattering. And then, in the middle of all that noise and light and judgment, I did something I didn't expect from myself. I stopped pleading with my face. My shoulders dropped, just slightly. My grip loosened. Not because I was giving in, because I was letting go of the fantasy that any of them would suddenly treat me like family. "I'm not getting on that flight," I said. The words didn't come out dramatic. They came out flat, final. Evan blinked, like he hadn't understood English for a second. "What?" "I'm not going," I repeated, and this time I looked straight at Becky. "Not like this." Becky's eyes widened, but only for a breath. Then her expression smoothed into something sharper. "Oh," she said, letting the syllable stretch, "so you're making a scene." I didn't answer right away. I didn't give her the argument. I only shifted my suitcase and stepped away from the check-in area toward the side where there was more space, more air. I could feel Evan following, his footsteps quick and irritated. "You're embarrassing my mom," he hissed. The phrase hit me wrong. Not "you're hurt," not "what happened," not "are you okay," just that. I turned my head slowly, the way you do when you're trying to keep your voice from rising. "Your mom embarrassed me," I said, "in front of everyone, and you stood there." His jaw tightened. He rubbed the back of his neck like he always did when he wanted the discomfort to disappear without him doing anything about it. "She didn't mean it like that." A short silence opened between us. It lasted only a second, but it felt like a whole room. "She said I'm used to coach," I said. "She gave everyone else first class. She left me in that line alone. She let me get hit with a baggage fee like it was part of the joke. Tell me what she meant, Evan." He looked past me, toward his family, toward Becky, toward the group clustered like a comfortable unit. He couldn't even keep his eyes on me long enough to lie with conviction. "We're going to miss boarding," he said instead. That was the answer. My stomach dropped, not with surprise, more like confirmation, like a nurse reading a chart and realizing the labs are exactly as bad as they feared. I nodded once. "Then go." His eyes snapped back to mine. "Are you serious?" I let out a breath that shook a little. "I've been serious for months," I said, and I hated that my voice cracked at the end. I just kept pretending it wasn't happening. Becky's heels clicked again. She appeared at Evan's shoulder with that same controlled smile, but there was a new edge to it now, something tight behind her eyes, like she hadn't planned for me to refuse the role she'd assigned. She tilted her chin. "If you want to leave," she said, "leave. But don't expect my son to chase you. He's not responsible for your sensitivity." Sensitivity. The word was sweetened and sharpened at the same time. I stared at her. In the hard airport light, I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the careful makeup, the practiced expression of a woman who had spent her life making sure people performed around her. And I suddenly felt something shift inside me. Not courage. Not yet. More like a cold clarity. My mouth moved before my fear could stop it. "You're cruel," I said. Becky's smile froze. Evan's face flushed red. His siblings, now aware, turned their heads. One of the girlfriends whispered something. The family's attention tightened like a rope around my neck. Becky's voice stayed level, but her eyes hardened. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said, and my heart was hammering so hard it made my words feel like they were coming from somewhere deeper than my lungs. "You've been cruel to me since the first time you met me. You talk about my parents like they're beneath you. You treat my work like it's nothing. And today you made it very clear what you think I deserve." Evan grabbed my elbow, not hard, but firm enough to control me. And that small pressure made something flare in me. "Stop," he said through clenched teeth. "You're being a bitch right now." The terminal seemed to tilt. I stared down at his hand on my arm. My skin prickled where he touched me. For a second, I couldn't speak. It wasn't the insult. Becky had been insulting me for months. It was the fact that it came from him so easily, so naturally, like he'd been waiting for permission. I pulled my arm back. "Don't touch me," I said quietly. Becky made a small sound, half scoff, half laugh. "See?" she said to Evan, as if I wasn't standing there. "This is what I mean. This is how she is." I could feel my eyes burning again. The urge to cry rose like a wave, but I kept my face still. I forced my fingers to keep hold of my suitcase handle. Evan stepped closer, voice lower, urgent. "Can we just talk about this later?" he said. "Not here." Not here? Not where people could see who they were? I looked at him, and in my mind I saw all the little moments I'd swallowed. The times Becky forgot my name, the dinners where she praised Evan's ex in front of me, the way she'd ask me questions and then cut me off with a laugh. I had been telling myself it was minor, that I was being too sensitive, that love meant compromise. But love wasn't supposed to feel like standing in line alone while everyone else breezed past you. "I don't want later," I said. Evan's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?" The words lodged in my throat, heavy, terrifying, undeniable. "I'm saying I'm done," I said. Becky's face changed. For the first time, her control slipped. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped, the smoothness cracking just enough to show something uglier underneath. Then she caught herself, glanced at the nearby faces, and softened her tone again. "You're emotional. You'll calm down." Evan exhaled sharply. "You can't break up with me at the airport," he said, like I was violating a rule of etiquette. I stared at him. "Watch me." A silence fell. Thin. Uncomfortable. Evan looked like he'd been slapped. Becky's lips pressed tight. His siblings shifted, pretending not to stare, but staring anyway. And in that silence, I felt the strangest thing. Relief. Small but unmistakable, like loosening a belt that had been cutting into my ribs for too long. Becky recovered first. She stepped closer, her voice quiet and venomous. "You'll regret this," she said. "Do you know how much money we just wasted because you decided to have a tantrum?" I lifted my chin. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You didn't waste money," I said. "You spent it to humiliate me." Becky's eyes flashed. "How dare you?" Evan looked torn, only not torn between me and what was right, torn between me and the comfort of falling back in line. His phone buzzed in his hand, boarding updates, family group chats, the world moving forward without me. "You're unbelievable," he said. "You just ruined this for everyone." I didn't answer him with more argument. I answered with movement. I turned my suitcase toward the exit, wheels clicking over the tile. Each step away felt like walking out of a room where I'd been holding my breath. Behind me, Becky hissed something under her breath. Evan called my name once, sharp and angry like a command. I didn't turn. The automatic doors whooshed open, letting in a gust of outside air that smelled like rain on pavement and car exhaust. My eyes stung, my hands shook, but I kept walking. My phone buzzed in my pocket before I even reached the curb. Then again, and again. I pulled it out, and Evan's name filled the screen like a warning, over and over, as if he could ring me back into obedience. The phone kept buzzing as I stood under the airport overhang, but I didn't answer it. I slipped it into my coat pocket instead, like I might slip a sharp object away from my skin. The noise of traffic washed over me, steady and indifferent, and for a moment I just stood there with my suitcase at my feet, letting the present drain out of me. I didn't always know how to leave. That truth settled heavy in my chest as I turned away from the curb and walked toward the rideshare pickup. Each step carried me backward, not forward, back into years where staying quiet felt safer than speaking, where endurance was mistaken for love. I grew up in a house where money was counted twice before it was spent once. My father came home every night with grease under his nails and exhaustion pressed into his shoulders like an extra layer of clothing. My mother worked split shifts at the diner, the smell of coffee and fried onions woven permanently into her hair. We didn't call it blue collar back then. It was just life. It was normal. It was honest. The first emotional anchor I ever learned was weight. Not metaphorical, but real. The weight of my mother's old leather purse when she handed it to me at 12 and said, "Hold this, don't set it down." Inside were folded bills, coupons clipped with care, receipts smoothed flat like they mattered. That purse taught me responsibility before I understood choice. At 16, I got my first job at a nursing home, cleaning rooms after the residents had been wheeled down for dinner. The halls always smelled like bleach and warm soup. Radios murmured old songs behind closed doors. Sometimes I found forgotten photos tucked into drawers, weddings, babies, men in uniforms long gone. I learned then how easily people become invisible. Nursing wasn't a calling at first. It was practical. It paid. It was steady. But the longer I stayed, the more it etched itself into me. I learned how to move quietly around pain, how to read a face before a chart, how to keep my voice calm when someone was afraid. And I learned how often women were expected to absorb discomfort without complaint. By the time I married my first husband, I was already practiced at that. We married young. He liked that I was low maintenance. That was his compliment. I cooked. I worked nights. I made sure the bills were paid. When he lost his job, I picked up extra shifts without telling anyone how tired I was. When he found someone else, I found myself alone at 42, standing in a quiet apartment with mismatched furniture and a hum in my ears that wouldn't go away. Divorce strips things down, not just possessions, identity. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, writing out monthly expenses in neat columns, the pen pressing hard enough to leave grooves. Rent, utilities, groceries, gas. There was no line for loneliness. There was no space to calculate grief. That legal pad became another anchor. I kept it folded in my work bag for years, updating numbers, crossing things out, proving to myself I could survive. Every time I opened it, the paper was softer, the edges worn. Survival leaves marks. When I met Evan, I wasn't looking for rescue. I was looking for quiet companionship. He was attentive in the beginning, curious about my work, polite to my parents. He liked that I didn't need much. I mistook that for respect. The first time I met Becky was over dinner at a restaurant she chose. White tablecloths, dim lighting meant to feel intimate, but somehow made everything colder. She looked me up and down before smiling, asked where I was from, what my parents did. When I answered, She nodded slowly and said, "That must have taught you humility." I laughed then. I didn't know what else to do. After that, the comments came softly, almost compliments. "You're very grounded. You don't seem high maintenance. Nursing is admirable. Hard work, though." She said these things while cutting her food carefully, never looking directly at me. Evan squeezed my knee under the table like that made it okay. I told myself I was imagining the edge. I told myself every family had dynamics. I told myself love meant flexibility. Holidays sharpened everything. Becky hosted. Her house was immaculate in a way that felt intentional, like she wanted the space to remind you who controlled it. She assigned seats at the table. I was always placed at the far end, near the kitchen door, close to where I could help, far from where decisions were made. Once, when I brought a homemade pie, she smiled and said, "Oh, you baked?" Like she hadn't expected me to know how. Another time, she praised Evan's ex for her polish, then glanced at me and added, "Not everyone is raised with the same expectations." I absorbed it. That was my skill. I absorbed and smoothed and endured. There were moments, quiet ones, when I felt the imbalance clearly. Watching Becky hand her daughters envelopes at Christmas, thick and heavy, then sliding me a small gift card with a wink, hearing her talk about investments, about real careers, while glancing at my scrubs folded over the back of a chair, feeling Evan's silence wrap around her words like agreement. But I had learned long ago that confrontation came with consequences. In my childhood, raising your voice meant bills didn't get paid. In my marriage, it meant doors slammed and weeks of coldness. Silence felt safer. Silence felt survivable. So I stayed. I adjusted. I told myself love wasn't supposed to be dramatic. The legal pad stayed in my bag. The purse memory stayed in my bones. The nursing halls stayed in my lungs. These anchors didn't fade. They waited. Looking back, I can see the slow corrosion, the way Becky's comments became more public, the way Evan stopped defending me and started redirecting me. She didn't mean it. That's just how she is. Don't take it personally. The first time Evan mentioned a family vacation, I felt a flicker of something like hope. Inclusion, maybe. Belonging. I didn't ask questions about tickets. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. That old training kicked in again. Accept what's offered. Don't ask for more. Standing at the airport curb, phone vibrating in my pocket, I could trace a straight line from that leather purse to that yellow legal pad to that coach ticket. Different objects, same lesson. Know your place. I sat on a concrete bench and finally let my shoulders sag. My hands trembled, not dramatically, just enough to notice. I pressed them flat against my thighs until they steadied. I thought about the residents at the nursing home who used to grip my wrist and say, "Don't leave yet." I thought about my mother counting bills at the kitchen table, her mouth set in concentration. I thought about myself, years ago, promising I wouldn't disappear inside someone else's comfort. The phone buzzed again. I didn't answer. I watched people hurry past instead. Families, couples, strangers with places to be. The world didn't end because I walked away. That realization was small, but it sat heavily with me. For the first time in a long while, I let myself name the truth quietly. I had been taught to survive, not to choose. And as I picked up my suitcase again, the old fear whispered that leaving would cost me everything. But another, steadier voice began to ask what staying had already taken. The first night after the airport, Evan didn't come home. I knew because the apartment stayed too quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The clock clicked. My phone lay face down on the coffee table like it was exhausted from trying. I didn't call him. I folded laundry instead, slow and precise, the way I did when my hands needed something to do so my mind wouldn't spin. His shirt smelled like the cologne Becky bought him every Christmas. I pressed one flat and felt my chest tighten. I set it aside and kept folding. When he finally walked in close to midnight, he didn't apologize. He didn't ask if I was okay. He dropped his keys into the bowl by the door louder than necessary and said, "My mom is devastated." I was standing at the sink, rinsing a mug. The water kept running. "She cried on the plane," he continued, kicking off his shoes. "Everyone was asking what happened. Do you have any idea how that looked?" I turned the faucet off. The silence that followed felt thick, like the air before a storm. "How it looked," I repeated. He sighed, rubbing his face. "You embarrassed her. You embarrassed me." The word embarrassed sat between us, heavy and familiar. I waited for the part where he would say he understood why I left. It didn't come. "I was humiliated," I said. He shrugged, a small, helpless motion. "She paid for everything." There it was again, money as permission. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I stood there with my hands damp and my shoulders squared, and something inside me started to go very still. Over the next few days, the messages came. Not from Evan, but from Becky. At first, they were polite, concerned. "I hope you're feeling better. Families have misunderstandings." Then they sharpened. "You owe Evan an apology. You wasted a lot of money. I never thought you'd hurt him like that." Each message arrived hours apart, timed so I never fully relaxed. I read them at work, in break rooms that smelled like stale coffee and antiseptic. I read them at red lights. I read them in bed, the glow of my phone carving harsh shadows across the ceiling. When I didn't respond, she changed tactics. She sent a group text to Evan's siblings, their partners, and me, thanking everyone for handling the situation with grace and apologizing that not everyone was prepared for the expectations of travel. My name wasn't mentioned. It didn't need to be. Evan came home that night with his jaw set tight. He didn't look at me when he said, "You should have just said sorry." "For what?" I asked. "For overreacting," he said, "for causing drama." The word landed hard. Drama. Again. I watched him take off his jacket, hang it up carefully like the apartment still belonged to him. He moved through the space like nothing had changed, like I hadn't walked out of an airport alone. "I didn't overreact," I said quietly. He laughed once, sharp. "Everyone thinks you did." Everyone. The weight of that pressed down on my chest. That night, we ate dinner in silence. Forks scraped plates. The television murmured in the background. I took small bites I couldn't taste. At one point, Evan glanced up and said, "My mom invited us to dinner Sunday." Us, like the word could patch over the crack. I didn't answer right away. I stared at the edge of my plate, the thin blue line circling it. The room felt colder, though the heat was on. "She wants to clear the air," he added. I nodded once. My throat felt tight. I didn't trust myself to speak. Sunday came too quickly. Becky's house was bright when we arrived, sunlight pouring through tall windows. Everything gleamed. The table was set with her good dishes, the ones she only used when company mattered. She greeted Evan with a kiss on the cheek and me with a nod. Dinner unfolded like a performance. Becky talked. Everyone listened. She told stories about the trip, how beautiful Cabo was, how smooth the flight had been, how relaxing it felt to be in first class. She didn't look at me when she said it, but her smile flicked in my direction anyway. I sat straight, hands folded in my lap. No one asked me how I was. Halfway through the meal, Becky set her fork down and sighed. The room quieted. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin and said, "I just want to say how hurt I was." Evan shifted beside me. I stayed still. "I've always tried to be generous," Becky continued, "but sometimes generosity is misunderstood." Her eyes met mine briefly, cool, appraising. "I grew up with expectations," she said. "Standards. I suppose not everyone is comfortable with them." Silence stretched. It pressed against my ears. I felt heat rise in my face, then ebb, leaving something hollow behind. "I didn't misunderstand anything," I said, my voice barely above the table. Becky smiled. "Of course you didn't think you did." Evan cleared his throat. "Mom, She waved a hand. I'm just being honest. Honest. The word hung there, distorted. After dinner, as plates were cleared and coffee poured, Becky pulled Evan aside. They spoke in low voices near the kitchen. I caught fragments. Sensitive. Background. Not a good fit. When they returned, Evan's expression had changed. His shoulders were tight. He didn't sit next to me again. On the drive home, he didn't turn the radio on. The car hummed beneath us. Streetlights passed in rhythmic flashes. She thinks you look down on her, he said suddenly. I stared out the window. That's not true. She feels judged, he continued, as if rehearsed. She thinks you resent her lifestyle. I laughed once, a sound that surprised me. She thinks I look down on her? He glanced at me, irritation flashing. This is what I mean. You always get defensive. Defensive. Another word placed carefully, like a label on a file. The next week, Becky escalated again. She sent Evan an itemized list of what the Cabo trip cost, complete with prices and dates, flights, hotel, activities. At the bottom, a total circled in red. He showed it to me without comment, his mouth tight. She's just venting, he said when I didn't respond. She's upset. I didn't ask for any of that, I said. He exhaled loudly. That's not the point. Money had become a weapon, polished and precise. At work, I found it harder to concentrate. I double-checked medication dosages I'd never missed before. I stood in supply closets longer than necessary, breathing in the sterile air until my hands stopped shaking. One afternoon, while charting, my phone buzzed. A message from Becky. I worry about Evan being tied to someone so unstable. I stared at the screen. The word unstable seemed to pulse. That night, when Evan came home, I showed him the message. He read it and shrugged. She's worried, he said. You did walk out on a vacation. A familiar cold settled in my chest. Weeks passed like this. Little cuts, small silences. Becky stopped inviting me to things altogether, then mentioned them casually afterward. Oh, we had brunch Sunday. We're going to a show next week. Evan went without me. He said it was easier. One evening, I came home to find my yellow legal pad open on the table. Evan had been organizing. My careful columns were crossed out, rewritten in his handwriting. You don't need to worry about money like this, he said, not looking up. My family handles things differently. I picked up the pad. The paper felt thinner than I remembered. Please don't touch this, I said. He frowned. Why are you so attached to it? I didn't answer. I closed it and slid it back into my bag, my fingers lingering on the worn edges. The apartment began to feel smaller. Conversations stalled. Touch disappeared. When I spoke, Evan's responses grew shorter. When I stayed quiet, he accused me of sulking. One night, lying in bed, I felt a tremor run through my hands. Not fear exactly, something like my body bracing for impact. I pressed my palms together under the covers until it passed. The final blow came quietly. Becky invited us to dinner again. Evan insisted. It's important, he said. We need to fix this. I went. Halfway through the meal, Becky leaned back and said casually, I've been thinking about the future. Evan perked up. I stiffened. I want grandchildren, she continued, but stability matters, emotional stability. Her gaze landed on me, steady and unblinking. I don't think you're ready for that, she said. The room went silent. No one spoke. No one moved. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and uneven. Evan didn't defend me. He stared at his plate. Something inside me collapsed. Not loudly, not all at once. Just a quiet caving in, like a ceiling giving way after too much weight. I realized then that this wasn't going to get better, that the cruelty wasn't accidental, that the silence was deliberate. I pushed my chair back slowly. The legs scraped the floor. I'm done, I said, my voice thin but clear. Becky's eyebrows lifted. With dinner? With all of it, I said. Evan looked up, alarm flashing. What are you talking about? I didn't answer him. I grabbed my coat, my bag, the legal pad pressed against my side. As I walked toward the door, Becky said softly, "You'll regret throwing away a good man." I paused, my hand on the knob. My chest felt tight, but there was something else there too. A spark, faint and dangerous. I turned just enough to meet her eyes. "We'll see," I said, and as I stepped out into the cold night air, I felt something in me shift, not toward hope, but toward a clarity that frightened me more than staying ever had. The snap didn't come with shouting. It came on a Tuesday morning, quiet and ordinary, the kind of morning that usually passed without leaving a mark. I was at work charting vitals at the nurse's station, the hum of fluorescent lights steady above me. The floor buffer droned down the hall. A patient laughed somewhere behind a curtain. Everything sounded normal, which made the moment land harder. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I almost ignored it. Becky's messages had trained me to expect a new wound every time the screen lit up. But this time, the preview line stopped me cold. From Evan. "We need to talk. Mom says this can't go on." I stared at the words longer than necessary. My fingers hovered, then lowered the phone back into my pocket without replying. My pulse slowed instead of racing, and that change caught my attention. No spike of panic, no rush to explain myself, just a flat, unmistakable knowing. This was the pattern reaching its end. A few minutes later, another vibration, then another. I finished my charting, signed my name, and asked a colleague to cover my break. She nodded without questions. I stepped into the stairwell where the signal was weaker and the air cooler. I called him. He answered immediately. "Finally." His tone was irritated, not relieved. That mattered. "I'm at work," I said. "What is it?" He exhaled loudly. "My mom thinks you're dragging this out on purpose." I leaned against the concrete wall. "Dragging what out?" "The tension," he said. "The drama. The way you keep making everything uncomfortable." I closed my eyes for a second. One breath in, one out. The stairwell smelled faintly of cleaning solution and dust. "She wants us to set boundaries," he continued, words tumbling faster now. "Like real ones, about expectations, about respect." My mouth tightened. Respect for who? There was a pause. Not long, just long enough. "For her," he said. That was it. No argument followed, no confusion, just a clean, sharp alignment of facts that had been circling for months and finally clicked into place. I straightened. My voice didn't shake. "And what about me?" He hesitated. "This isn't about you versus her." I let out a quiet breath through my nose. "It is," I said. "You just chose the side." He bristled. "I'm not choosing sides. I'm trying to keep the peace." Peace. Another word that meant silence, obedience, erasure. "I'm done keeping peace that costs me myself," I said. He scoffed. "You're being dramatic again." Again. Always again. I didn't argue. I didn't list examples. I didn't defend my worth. Something in me had gone still enough to see that explanation was just another form of begging. "This isn't working," I said, "and it hasn't been for a long time." The silence on the other end stretched. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped into something sharper. "So what, you're breaking up with me because my mom doesn't like you?" I considered that, the way he framed it, the minimization wrapped in a joke. "No," I said. "I'm ending this because you don't protect me." The words landed heavy. I could hear his breath catch, then harden. "That's unfair." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "That's what you always say." He shifted tactics. I could hear it in his tone. "You're throwing away years over one incident." "One incident?" I repeated. The stairwell felt colder. I adjusted my grip on the phone. "This wasn't one incident," I said. "This was a pattern, and you've been part of it." His voice rose. "You're rewriting history." There it was, the gaslight flickering one last time. I didn't engage it. "I'll pack my things tonight," I said. Or you can. Either way, I'm done." He laughed then, short and disbelieving. "You can't just decide this on your own." I felt something tighten in my chest, not fear, not sadness, recognition. "I can," I said, "and I am." The line went quiet. I imagined him standing in our apartment, phone to his ear, looking around like the walls had betrayed him. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. I didn't answer that. Mistakes implied uncertainty. This felt like the opposite. "We'll talk later," he added, trying to regain control, "when you calm down." I ended the call. My hand trembled as I lowered the phone. I pressed my palm flat against the wall until the tremor passed. My breath came shallow, then steadied. This was the snap. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity cutting clean through noise. I took the rest of the day off. I told my supervisor I needed personal time. She looked at me for a long second, then nodded. "Take care," she said, and meant it. When I got home, the apartment felt unfamiliar, like I'd stepped into a place I'd already left. I moved through it slowly. I packed only what was mine: clothes, shoes, books. The yellow legal pad went into my bag last. Evan came home halfway through. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching me fold. "You're serious," he said. I didn't look up. "Yes." He leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "My mom says you're doing this to punish us." I placed a stack of sweaters into my suitcase. "This isn't about punishment." "Then what is it about?" I zipped the case halfway, paused, and met his eyes. "It's about stopping," I said. "Stopping the slow damage." He shook his head. "You'll regret this." I closed the suitcase fully. The zipper made a clean, final sound. "Maybe," I said, "but I won't regret choosing myself." He watched me carry the suitcase toward the door. He didn't stop me. He didn't apologize. He didn't reach out. At the threshold, I hesitated, not because I wanted to stay, but because the weight of what came next pressed in. Uncertainty, fallout, consequences. As I stepped into the hall, my phone buzzed again. A new message. From Becky. "I warned Evan about you." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt ready to respond, knowing that whatever came next would no longer be on their terms. I didn't answer Becky's message. That was the first act of preparation, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. Silence this time wasn't surrender. It was space. Space to see clearly without their voices pressing in. I stayed with my sister for a few nights. Her spare room smelled like clean sheets and lavender detergent, and the quiet there felt different, less sharp, less watchful. I slept badly the first night, waking with my heart racing, fingers curled as if gripping something invisible. By the third night, my breathing slowed. During the days I returned to the apartment while Evan was at work, I told him by text when I'd be there, short, factual messages. No emotion. He didn't reply. I moved methodically, drawer by drawer, shelf by shelf. I separated what was mine from what was shared. Every object I touched seemed to carry a question. How long had I been making myself smaller to fit around this? I found the legal pad again, tucked behind a stack of old mail he hadn't opened. Its pages were dog-eared, the numbers smudged where my thumb had traced them over and over. I flipped through it slowly, noticing something new this time. Not fear, but proof. Proof of consistency. Proof that I had always planned, always carried weight quietly. I packed it carefully. On the fourth day, Evan texted, "Mom wants to meet. She says we need to clear the air." I stared at the message until the words blurred slightly. My first instinct was to say no, to protect the fragile steadiness I'd begun to build. But another thought followed, slower and colder. This wasn't about peace. This was about narrative. "Where?" I typed. "Her place," he replied almost instantly. "Sunday." I didn't commit right away. I spent the next 2 days doing something I'd never done in this relationship. I paid attention. I went back through old messages. Not obsessively, deliberately. I scrolled past the early sweetness, the polite dinners, the shallow jokes. I stopped where the tone shifted, where Becky's help became correction, where her concern became judgment. I took screenshots, not because I planned to use them yet, but because seeing them lined up, date after date, remark after remark, anchored me in reality. Patterns become undeniable when they're written down. A message from Becky, months ago. You should encourage Evan to aim higher. Another, some women don't understand how demanding a real family can be. Another, after a holiday dinner. I hope you weren't offended. You know, I only want what's best. Each one polite. Each one pointed. My hands trembled slightly as I saved them. I paused, breathed, continued. I found emails too. Invitations sent to Evan, but not me. Follow-ups that mentioned me as an afterthought. Tell her we missed her. Missed me without inviting me. A small, sharp realization landed. This wasn't personal misunderstanding. This was orchestration. On Friday, a colleague noticed I was quieter than usual. She didn't pry. She just said, "If you need someone to listen, I'm here." I nodded. That was enough. Sunday came. I arrived at Becky's house alone. That mattered. She opened the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her living room looked exactly as it always had, carefully arranged, neutral colors, nothing out of place. Control disguised as comfort. Evan stood near the window, arms folded. He looked relieved when he saw me, like my presence confirmed something he'd been telling himself. We sat. Becky poured tea. The cups clinked softly against saucers. "I'm glad you came," she said. "It shows maturity." I didn't answer. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup and waited. She launched into it smoothly. Concern. Disappointment. How hard the past few weeks had been on Evan. How families require compromise. How emotions can distort intention. I listened without interrupting. That was new, too. When she paused, she leaned forward slightly. "I think if you could acknowledge your part in what happened, we could move forward." There it was, the invitation to erase myself politely. I set the cup down. "I'm not here to apologize," I said. The room cooled instantly. Evan shifted. "Can you just—" I held up a hand. He stopped. "I'm here to be clear," I continued, "about what I will and won't accept." Becky smiled tightly. "We all have limits." "Yes," I said. "We do." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list grievances. I stated boundaries. Simple, direct, no decoration. "I won't accept being spoken to with contempt," I said. "I won't accept being excluded and then blamed for noticing, and I won't stay in a relationship where my dignity is negotiable." Becky's smile slipped, just for a moment. "That's quite dramatic," she said. I didn't react. "It's factual." Evan looked between us, uneasy. "Mom's just trying to help." I turned to him. "Then help doesn't look like this for me." Becky set her cup down hard enough to clink. "You're painting me as a villain," she said. I met her gaze. "I'm describing my experience." Silence stretched. It pressed against my ribs. Becky broke it with a soft laugh. "You've always been sensitive," she said. "That's not an insult. It's just who you are." There it was again, the soft blade. I stood, Evan startled. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I said calmly. "I said what I came to say." Becky rose too. "Running away again?" I paused at the doorway, not because I was shaken, because something clicked into place with sudden clarity. "No," I said. "I'm walking away with my eyes open." I left without waiting for permission. That night, my phone buzzed with messages. Evan, his sister, Becky again. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I organized. I printed the screenshots. I saved the emails to a folder. I wrote dates in the margins. Not accusations, timelines. I consulted a therapist I'd seen years ago, booked a session. I told my sister everything without minimizing. She listened. She believed me. That mattered more than I expected. Midweek, Evan showed up at my sister's place unannounced. He stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, looking smaller than I remembered. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he said. I stayed inside the doorway. "You don't get to decide that." He frowned. "My mom thinks you're setting me up to look bad." I almost smiled. Almost. "I'm not setting anyone up," I said. "I'm stepping back." He looked past me into the quiet house, like he was searching for something to hold on to. "So what now?" I took a breath. "Now I protect myself." He scoffed. "From what? Words?" I didn't answer that. I closed the door gently. The next day, a letter arrived. Becky's handwriting, elegant, controlled. Inside, she expressed disappointment, concern for Evan, regret that things had spiraled. She warned that misunderstandings could have lasting consequences. At the bottom, one line stood out. "I hope you understand how these situations can affect reputations." Reputations. The word settled heavy and slow. I placed the letter into the folder with the others. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad open, not calculating this time, just breathing, I realized something else had shifted. I wasn't gathering these things to attack. I was gathering them so I could no longer be erased. My phone buzzed once more. A new message from Evan. "She's talking to a lawyer friend. You should be careful." I stared at the screen, my pulse steady, and for the first time I felt the quiet certainty that whatever move they were preparing, I was no longer walking into it blind. The room wasn't a courtroom, but it felt like one. Becky had chosen the setting carefully. A family meeting at her house, Sunday afternoon, everyone present. Evan, his siblings, 2 partners, even an aunt I'd only met once. She framed it as concern, as closure, as a chance to talk things through like adults. I arrived alone again. That mattered more this time. The living room was bright, curtains pulled back to let in sharp afternoon light. No soft lamps, no shadows to hide in. Becky sat at the head of the room, posture upright, hands folded neatly in her lap. Evan stood near the fireplace, jaw tight. The others arranged themselves along the couches, some stiff, some curious, all alert. I took the chair opposite Becky. No one offered me tea. Becky began, voice calm, measured, already practiced. "We're all here because things have gotten out of hand," she said, "and I think it's important that we clear up some misunderstandings before they cause permanent damage." Her eyes flicked briefly toward Evan, then back to me. "I've always welcomed you," she continued. "I've always tried to include you. But lately, there have been accusations, serious ones, that I don't understand." A murmur moved through the room. Evan's sister shifted, arms crossed. Someone cleared their throat. Becky sighed softly, the sound carefully engineered to signal exhaustion. "I don't want this to become something ugly." I nodded once. "Neither do I." She looked almost surprised that I spoke without trembling. "Then please," she said gently, "explain why you've been telling people I humiliated you, why you walked away from a family vacation, why you've put Evan in such an impossible position." Every face turned toward me. The light felt harsh on my skin. I could feel my pulse in my throat. For a moment, the old instinct surged, the urge to soften, to reassure, to take responsibility just to make it stop. I didn't. I reached into my bag and set a folder on the coffee table between us. The sound it made when it landed was small, but the room reacted anyway. Becky's eyes dropped to it. Evan stiffened. "I'm not here to attack anyone," I said. My voice was steady enough to surprise even me. "I'm here because what's been happening has been denied for too long." Becky smiled politely. "I don't know what that is." I opened the folder. The first page was a printed screenshot. Becky's name at the top. A message dated months before the airport. "You should encourage Evan to aim higher." I didn't read it aloud. I didn't need to. I slid it forward so the people closest could see. Then another. Some women don't understand how demanding a real family can be. Another. I hope you weren't offended. You know I only want what's best. The room went very quiet. Becky leaned back slightly, her expression tightening. Those are private messages, she said, taken out of context. I met her gaze. There are more. I laid them out one by one, spacing them carefully, like evidence that needed room to breathe. Dates visible, names clear. No commentary from me yet, just pattern. Evan's sister leaned forward, squinting. One of the partners shifted closer to read. Becky's smile disappeared. You're twisting things, she said sharply. Anyone can cherry-pick messages. I turned another page, an email this time, an invitation to a holiday dinner, sent to Evan only, a follow-up message afterward. Tell her we missed her. I felt something in my chest tighten, then release. I was excluded, I said calmly, repeatedly, and then blamed for noticing. Evan stepped forward. That's not fair. I held up a hand. He stopped. I'm not finished, I said, and the authority in my voice made the room still. Becky's fingers curled into the arm of her chair. I continued. At the airport, 7 first-class tickets were purchased. 1 coach ticket was handed to me. I was told I was used to it. I was left alone in line. I was charged a baggage fee while everyone else watched. Becky scoffed. That's your interpretation. I looked directly at Evan. Is it? He didn't answer. The silence stretched. It wasn't soft. It wasn't forgiving. It was heavy enough to make people uncomfortable. Finally, Evan's brother spoke. Mom, did you really say that? Becky's head snapped toward him. I was joking. I didn't react. I slid out another page, a message from after the breakup. I worry about Evan being tied to someone so unstable. That one I did read aloud. The word unstable seemed to echo in the room. Evan flinched. Becky stood abruptly. This is outrageous, she snapped. You're trying to destroy me in my own home. I remained seated. No, I said quietly. I'm refusing to be erased in it. Her breath came faster now. The calm veneer cracked. You've always had a chip on your shoulder, she said. About money, about class, about not fitting in. I tried to help you. I tried to raise you up. The words hung there. Something in the room shifted. Evan's aunt inhaled sharply. His sister stared at Becky, eyes narrowed. I spoke into the silence. You didn't try to raise me up, I said. You tried to put me in my place. The sentence froze the room. No one moved. No one spoke. Becky's mouth opened, then closed. Her face flushed, then paled. Evan looked at her, then at me, like he was seeing both of us clearly for the first time, and didn't like what that revealed. That's not, he began. I turned to him. You watched it happen. His jaw tightened. I didn't think it was that bad. I nodded. That was the problem. Becky laughed then, brittle and sharp. So this is what you wanted? She said. An audience? To embarrass me? I glanced around the room, faces tense, no smiles, no easy agreement. I didn't bring this out in public, I said. You did, when you made it impossible to address privately. Her eyes flashed. You're trying to ruin our family. I stood. The movement was slow, deliberate. Every eye followed. I'm not ruining anything, I said. I'm stepping out of something that was already broken. Evan took a step toward me. Please, he said, voice low. We can still fix this. I looked at him. Really looked. You had every chance, I said, and you chose comfort over courage every time. The words landed like a verdict. Evan's shoulders sagged. He didn't argue. Becky's voice rose, losing control. You think you're so righteous, she snapped. You think because you're a nurse, you're some kind of martyr. I felt the old sting, but it didn't take root. I think because I've spent my life caring for people who were dismissed and minimized, I recognize it when it's happening to me, I said. The room went silent again. Becky's hands trembled now, just slightly. She pressed them together to hide it. Evan's sister spoke quietly. "Mom, this doesn't look good." That was the line that changed everything. Becky turned on her, incredulous. "You're taking her side?" "I'm looking at what's in front of me," his sister replied. Becky's composure finally fractured. "She manipulated you," she snapped. "She's been planning this." I closed the folder. "I didn't plan this," I said. "I survived it." I picked up my bag. "I'm done explaining myself," I added. "I'm done asking to be treated with basic decency." I turned toward the door. Behind me, Becky said something, sharp, desperate, but I didn't hear the words clearly. They didn't matter anymore. Evan didn't follow me this time. As I stepped into the sunlight outside, the air felt cooler, cleaner. My hands shook, not from fear, but from release. I knew then that whatever story they told after this, it wouldn't include my silence. And for the first time, that felt like justice already beginning to take shape. I didn't go back. That was the first boundary that held. In the weeks after that afternoon, the noise faded in stages. Evan stopped texting first, then altogether. Becky's messages never came to me directly again, only filtered rumors, secondhand comments that reached me through the thinnest threads and then fell apart on their own. I didn't chase clarity anymore. I didn't correct the record. I let distance do the work I'd once tried to do with explanation. I moved my things out fully on a quiet Wednesday. The apartment echoed when I carried the last box down the stairs. No confrontation, no final speech, just the clean thud of the door closing behind me. Life didn't become dramatic or triumphant after that. It became quieter. I returned to my routines, early mornings, long shifts, the steady rhythm of care that had always grounded me. Patients still needed help. Medication still had to be checked twice. Hands still needed holding. The world didn't stop just because my heart had finally chosen itself. Some nights were harder than others. I won't pretend otherwise. There were moments when old reflexes flared, wondering if I'd been too harsh, too sensitive, too unwilling to bend. Those thoughts passed quicker now. They didn't nest the way they used to. I started therapy again, not to process them, but to rebuild me, to understand why silence had once felt like safety, to unlearn the habit of shrinking. One evening, after a late shift, I sat at my sister's kitchen table with the yellow legal pad open in front of me, not to budget, not to calculate loss, just to write. I wrote what I wanted my life to feel like: steady, honest, unconditional. The pad looked different under my pen now, less like a survival tool, more like a map. Evan tried once more, months later. A voicemail, careful, regretful in tone, but vague in substance. He said he missed me. He said things had been hard. He said his mother was struggling to understand. He never said he was sorry for not protecting me. I didn't call back. That was the second boundary that held. Becky, I heard, stopped hosting big family gatherings for a while. When she did, the room dynamics were different, quieter, more cautious. I wasn't there to witness it, and I didn't need to be. Justice didn't require my presence anymore. I took a weekend trip by myself that spring. Nothing extravagant. A small coastal town, a modest hotel. I booked the ticket without asking anyone's opinion. Coach, by choice this time, because it didn't matter. On the flight, I watched clouds drift past the window and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Peace. Not the loud kind, not the victorious kind, the quiet kind that comes when you're no longer bracing for the next cut. I thought about all the times I'd been told to be grateful, all the times gratitude had been used as a leash. I thought about the woman I'd been, capable, resilient, endlessly accommodating, and how close she'd come to disappearing entirely. She didn't disappear. She learned. The yellow legal pad still sits in my bag sometimes, not because I need it, but because it reminds me where I started. It used to mean survival, proof that I could endure. Now it means something else. It means I can choose. If my story stayed with you, maybe it's because you've carried your own version of that pad, quietly keeping track, quietly holding on. If so, I hope you know this. Recognizing your worth isn't betrayal, it's awakening.